Hey everybody, I'm Luke from AWS, and welcome to This Is My Architecture. Today I'm here with Ron from Informatica. Hi Ron.
Hey Luke.
Would you mind telling us a little bit about Informatica?
Sure. So Informatica is the leader in enterprise cloud data management.
Okay, great. And let's say I'm a new AWS customer and I just started using Amazon Redshift. I have data in all these different data sources. I might have some in my on-premises data center and some in the cloud. How can Informatica help me to load that into my data warehouse?
Well, that's actually one of Informatica's greatest strengths, is we actually have connectivity to pretty much any application a customer might want to connect to, whether it's in the cloud or on-premise. So from a cloud standpoint, a few examples are systems like Salesforce, Workday, NetSuite, Eloqua. On the on-premise side, there's SAP, maybe data warehouses in Teradata or Netezza, and even from the mainframe directly, those are things that customers are connecting to.
Great. So walk me through this a little bit and tell me how a customer might get started with this.
Sure. So what customers would typically do is they'd go into Informatica, and from our visual design environment, they'll actually go off and connect to whatever their data source is, and they'll visually go off and create a data load into Redshift. Now, typically along the way, they're not just taking the data as is and loading the data into Redshift. They're performing typically some form of transformation on that. So there's the classic ETL types of transformations, substrings, concats, and so forth. But we're also seeing customers take the old adage in BI around garbage in, garbage out, and trying to avoid that this time around with Redshift. So where possible, they're using things like data quality, and maybe you've got address information. Go ahead and do address verification and cleansing on that data before it ever gets loaded. They're using Informatica to do that.
Wow. So many of our customers also tell us that data privacy and security is very important to them. Can Informatica help in that aspect of making sure that my data is cleansed as well?
Yeah, that is definitely something that we can help with. As part of our transformation engine, we have the ability to actually do data masking. So we can recognize certain types of data, things like social security numbers, credit cards, date of birth. We can recognize that and automatically mask it. So we can put it in a format that's still going to be valuable from an analytics standpoint, but the data will be masked so the sensitive data actually isn't going to be stored in Redshift.
That's great. And then that data never leaves my on-premises data center.
That's right. As it's being moved, it's being transformed and then loaded in a secure way into Redshift.
Great. What happens next?
So from a visual standpoint, it's pretty much all a user needs to do is they map, transform, and load the data in. But behind the scenes, we're actually going to use the most performant way to actually do the data load into Redshift. So it's not a direct load. Using the same best practices that everyone else is using, we're going off and loading the data into S3 first, and then automatically performing the copy commands so that the data actually gets loaded into the Redshift tables. Now, one of the things that Informatica can also do as part of this is we actually have partitioning capabilities. So you can actually open up multiple parallel connections so that we're loading data in parallel into S3 and doing the data loads. And if you're doing as through the partitioning, if you're leveraging something like key range partitioning, we can actually use your distribution keys in Redshift so that, again, the data gets in as fast as possible. And when you're actually querying the data, you're getting the best response.
I was going to ask about that. So, one of the keys to getting great query performance after the data is loaded is following those best practices for partitioning and distribution keys. So Informatica can take care of that as well? And
that's all done automatically for the user. From a visual standpoint, it's a very simple drag-drop mapping, and all of this complexity happens behind the scenes. The end user doesn't have to do any coding. It happens automatically.
That's great. So what's the next step?
So what we see with customers is typically they're actually going off, and this is usually just some sort of a staging area. The data doesn't automatically get landed there and people start reporting on it. There's usually multiple steps to put the data into a format so that it's actually usable. So a lot of customers load it into an intermediate area of some sort, and then it gets loaded into a final analytics schema. And they're using Informatica to actually do the additional transformations to move it from that kind of raw state until you get to that final analytics state at the end.
Okay, great. And how can Informatica help to optimize that process of transforming the data?
So from a visual and user standpoint, it's the same interface as what you're doing in the front end of the process. But behind the scenes, as you're doing this, we'll actually recognize from a runtime standpoint that all this data is actually residing already inside of Redshift. So we'll actually perform ELT, where we'll recognize this is all in Redshift, so we'll generate automatically for the user the SQL statements needed to actually transform the data directly in Redshift for best performance. So ELT will be performed over here in Redshift, and where needed, we'll use our engines for everywhere else.
So there's no need to pull that data back out, transform it, put it back in. We can get the best possible query performance or transformation performance by directly transforming the data as it exists in the Redshift cluster.
That's right. And from an end user standpoint, the visual mapping is exactly the same. There's simply a checkbox to enable pushdown or ELT, and it happens automatically for them.
So I see BI tools over here. How can Informatica help with that?
Yeah, so a lot of the BI tools like Tableau can actually sit directly on top of Redshift, but there are certain use cases where you might actually want to load directly into the native BI tool formats. So Informatica also has the connectors all the way out to the targets in the BI tools. So for instance, with Tableau, there's something called a TDE file. We can natively generate that over on the BI side so that you get all the way from the end, from the source through Redshift into the BI tools. All of that's taken care of with Informatica.
Well, thanks for sharing your architecture with us, Ron. And thanks for watching. This is my architecture.